Billy Joel is one of the most legendary and iconic artists in the history of American music, and he's still out there performing in sold-out arenas all over the country. This is Sound of History, and this is the story of Billy Joel. Sorry for the way I sound. I have COVID, so I probably sound kind of stuffy.
Same.
William Martin Joel was born on May 9th, 1949 in the Bronx, New York. His father, Howard, was an accomplished pianist and also a German Jewish Holocaust survivor.
Goodness gracious.
They moved from Germany, where Billy's grandfather had a successful textile business, to Switzerland to escape the Jewish persecution in Germany. Later, they immigrated to New York by way of Cuba, since immigration quotas for German Jews meant that they couldn't immigrate directly from Germany to the U.S. His grandfather, on his dad's side, had a very successful business.
Right.
And at that point, it was becoming illegal for Jewish people to own businesses in Germany.
Good call.
So there was a lot of news in the press about how Mr. Howard Joel, I think his name was, no, his father's name was Howard. I don't remember his grandfather's name. About how he was this evil person because he was Jewish. And then someone bought his business for 10% of what it was worth.
Oh gosh.
And then never actually paid him the money because
Nice,
you
classy.
didn't really have to, because it was a German person buying it from a Jewish person. The grandfather had no choice. He was basically just I have to sell this. And then they tried moving to a few different areas in Germany, and it was just not working out, so they fled to Cuba.
Awful.
Billy has said that neither of his parents would ever really talk about World War II, and it wasn't until much later that he learned his father's family's history.
Goodness.
At the age of 1, the family moved to Oyster Bay, a suburb of Long Island, New York. At the age of 4, Billy reluctantly agreed to start taking piano lessons from some really great piano teachers. He was apparently pretty good, even though he wasn't super interested in it. He told a story about, he would be taking the lessons. He would go to the lesson. The teacher would give him the music to, learn and practice at home. And he would go home, and he would just kind of, start improvising and start playing things that sounded good to him. And, his mom was like, this sounds great. You're doing great.
That's hilarious.
But then he would go back to the lessons, and the teacher would be like, okay, play what you've practiced. And he'd be like, oh, crap. I don't know the song she gave me. I've just been playing what I wanted. As a teenager, he started to rebel a bit. He joined a few teenage street gangs and started an amateur boxing career as a welterweight. He has also said that he started learning how to fight and box because the piano lessons happened to be in the same building as ballerina classes. So he would be made fun of a lot for going to ballerina lessons. So he had to learn to fight back.
Oh.
He won 22 fights, but quit soon after he broke his nose in his 24th fight. He would continue fighting and studying music for most of his teenage years, until 1964 when he was 15 and he saw the Beatles perform on Ed Sullivan. It was after that performance that he decided to dedicate his life to being a professional musician. So he started trying to find a local Long Island band to join. He said, quote, "That one performance changed my life. Up to that moment, I'd never considered playing rock as a career. And when I saw 4 guys who didn't look like they'd come out of the Hollywood star mill, who played their own songs and instruments, and especially because you could see this look in John Lennon's face, I said, I know these guys. I can relate to these guys. I am these guys.
That's cool.
This is what I'm going to do, play in a rock band," end quote.
That's cool.
In 1957, his parents divorced, and his dad, who always hated living in America, moved back to Europe and settled in Vienna, where he remarried and had another son. Billy was a pretty decent student, but he was playing piano in clubs and bars at night to help support his mom and his sister. So he was up really late one night playing in the bars, and he missed a crucial English exam the next morning. So he didn't have enough credits to graduate with his class. Instead of taking summer classes and graduating late, he decided to just drop out and focus on music. He said, quote, "If I'm not going to Columbia University, I'm going to Columbia Records, and you don't need a high school diploma over there." End quote. Around this time, he became a part of a local band called the Echoes that specialized in covering British invasion songs.
That's perfect.
The group actually got a little bit of local popularity, which encouraged him to drop out of school to pursue music as a career. While a member of the Echoes and only 16 years old, he started to work as a session musician, playing piano on a few well-known tracks. The Echoes changed their name a couple of times to the Emeralds and the Lost Souls, but Billy left the group in 1967 to join a different Long Island-based band called the Hassles. The Hassles already had a deal with United Artists Recordings. They would release 2 albums that were both commercial failures before disbanding in 1969. When the group disbanded, Billy and the drummer for the group, named John Small, started a proto-metal organ and drums band called Attila.
That's good. That's a good name.
It was a heavy, psychedelic sound that they achieved through numerous effects pedals on Billy's organ. The band released one album in 1970 that completely bombed, and then the duo broke up. Partly because of the bad sales, but mostly because Billy started an affair with John's wife. According to Billy, John, the drummer, went on to be a very successful video producer and director. Billy would later marry John's ex-wife, who he had an affair with. In a 1994 Q&A session, he said that he and John were still very good friends. Quote, "Because we share an ex-wife, we have very good stories to swap." End quote.
My gosh.
They also, John and that wife had a son together. So after Attila broke up, Billy entered a period of deep depression for several months. He worked a few odd jobs as a music critic for a magazine and as a session player for jingles. Eventually, he attempted suicide by drinking a bottle of furniture polish.
I did not know that.
Yeah. After that failed attempt, he checked himself into a psychiatric hospital where he received treatment for his depression. Talking about it later, Billy said, quote, "I just figured the world didn't need another failed musician. You take yourself so seriously, you've got your head so far up your butt, you can't see straight." End quote. He said it was kind of a funny accident that the attempt didn't work. He said, quote, "I was just looking for poison. I looked in my mother's closet, and there was bleach, and it had the skull and crossbones. And then there was furniture polish. At the time, I thought, well, the furniture polish will probably taste better than the bleach, so I'll drink the furniture polish. All I ended up doing was farting furniture polish for a couple of days." End quote. After recovering from that episode, he signed a solo deal with Family Productions. The contract actually had a clause in it that made Billy signed to the label for life.
What?
Billy didn't know about that when he signed, and it would haunt him for years.
I hate sleazy people.
The producer who worked with him on his debut album put something like $450,000 into developing him and the album. The album that they worked on was mastered at too high of a speed and was a commercial disaster. Billy abruptly changed ways from Attila and positioned himself as a sensitive singer-songwriter. He went on to tour to support a few big acts like the Beach Boys. Although his performances were very well reviewed, Billy was really unhappy with the quality of his album and his shows.
I'd be unhappy with the quality of my album, too. I'd be mad.
Yeah, I think he also didn't love the songs on it. Financial difficulties within Family Productions stopped him from making another album as soon as he would have liked. An executive for Columbia Records heard Billy's music and really liked it after he moved to Los Angeles in 1972. Whenever he moved, one of his songs, Captain Jack, started to get like really popular on like college radio stations, so one of the executives heard that song that way. It still wasn't like a hit, but it was kind of like a little cult hit.
Yeah.
While in LA, Billy spent half a year playing piano in a bar called the Executive Room under the name Bill Martin.
Piano Man.
That's where he wrote the song Piano Man about the bar's patrons that he saw while he was playing there. Even though he had a contract with Columbia, he was still bound to Family Productions, so Columbia had to pay them 25 cents for every album that Columbia sold. In 1973, Billy released Piano Man through Columbia to modest success, but it did feature the song Piano Man, which became his signature track and would close his shows, of which there were a ton during this time. Billy has said that he doesn't understand the success of that song. He says the piano melody is super repetitive and not the most fun to play. He said that the lyrics are basically limericks, though they tell a pretty cool story. The song eventually made it to the top 40, becoming his first hit, and the album peaked at number 27. By the end of 1974, he released his second album with Columbia, called Street Life Serenade, which peaked at number 35 on the charts. Its single, The Entertainer, didn't do quite as well, but was still a minor hit. Many of the songs on that album reflected his growing disillusionment with Hollywood and the entertainment business. Fed up with LA, Billy returned to New York City in 1975 and began working on his next album. He originally recorded the album with members of Elton John's band, but he didn't like the result, so he scrapped it and started over with musicians that he handpicked. With songs like Say Goodbye to Hollywood and New York State of Mind, the album, called Turnstiles, celebrated his return home. But the album failed to chart.
How?
Well, it only reached 122. So,
How?
Well,
It's wild.
Billy knew that his next album would make or break his career. He couldn't keep scraping by with mediocre success. He needed hits, or the label would drop him. So in 1977, he got to work for his third Columbia album. He met a new producer named Phil Ramone, who he would work with for many albums after this. He released The Stranger, which hit number 2 in the charts and became Columbia's highest-selling album. He demanded to record the album with his touring band because he hated the polished sound of session musicians. His next album, 52nd Street, spent over 8 weeks at number 1. Around this time, as a birthday present, the president of Columbia Records bought off Billy's old family production contract and bought back the rights to all of his recordings.
So that Columbia had them, or Billy?
I think for all of his pre-Columbia stuff, Billy had the rights to it.
Okay.
There were just no hits on that, so.
I'm not sure who this gift benefited more.
Yeah. Apparently, he had to threaten the family production CEO to get the deal done. Had to physically threaten him. In 1980, Billy released his Harder Edge album that was a response to the punk and new wave movement that was sweeping across the country. It stayed at number 1 for 6 weeks and spawned 4 top 40 singles. Before this album, critics had started to call him a soft rocker and a balladeer, which he didn't think was fair. So this was to show them that he could still play rock music.
I like it.
He wrote a slow song on this album that was inspired by a Beatles song. He said that when he was younger, he wrote the Beatles a letter asking them for advice on how to get started in the industry. Do you think the Beatles responded to him?
I don't. They don't seem like the type that would.
They also seem like the type who would get millions of letters a year. So it's probably hard to. But they sent him a pamphlet about Beatles merchandise that he could buy.
Great.
So, inspired by that event, later in his career, Billy started to do Q&A sessions around the world where people could ask him questions about the music industry. His next album was a live album that focused on music before his rise to superstardom in 1977. In 1982, he suffered a terrible motorcycle accident that required surgery to fix his wrist. He also divorced Elizabeth, his first wife. So this is a rough time for him.
Yeah.
Elizabeth was also his manager at the time and was making she was making a lot of enemies with the way she handled stuff.
Interesting.
He released a concept album about the experience of baby boomers that was basically a flop, but he released a more doo-wop/pop album called An Innocent Man in 1983 that returned him to bestseller status. Many of the top songs on the album, like Uptown Girl, The Longest Time, and Tell Her About It, were inspired by model Christy Brinkley, who was engaged to Billy at the time. They met while they were both vacationing in the Caribbean. Billy tried to impress her. He said, quote, "I tried to look like me on an album cover. I gave it every angle I could." Quote, end quote.
So he just stood there voguing, trying to get her attention?
He was basically trying to, make her see that, remind her of who he was. This is what I look like on The Stranger.
Oh, my God.
It didn't work. He said he just, went and was just, hanging out on the beach for a while. And then he got up and he just went to a bar on the island, and it was a piano bar. So he saw the piano and just started playing. And then Christy came in, and she sat down and started singing with him.
That's adorable.
Originally he was like, all right, like this is, but she said that he just looked like a little lobster because he was burned from sitting in the sun all day, just like
Oh
playing
my
his
God.
piano in his like little, probably like tank top or whatever.
Oh my God.
He did not look impressive.
Oh my goodness.
Also, at the same time, another model named Elle McPherson was on the island with Christy, and they like both saw him at the piano bar. And at the time, Christy was engaged to someone else, like a billionaire guy.
What is it with Billy and stealing people's women?
So Billy said that like while he was sitting there, he heard that she was engaged, and he was like, in his mind, he switched, and he was like, okay, well, obviously that's not going to happen. So he switched his attention to Elle McPherson,
Yeah.
who you probably know best as Joey's hot roommate in Friends.
No way!
Yeah, that's Elle McPherson.
Shut up.
She's like an Australian actress, I think, or an Australian model. So once they left the island, he started dating Elle instead of Christy. He said he actually wrote Uptown Girl about Elle McPherson, but it was probably also about Christy. I don't know.
Interesting.
I'm going way off script here, so this is just off memory. But he said that while he was dating Elle, it kind of reached a point where like they were walking together and he took her to like Coney Island or something stupid like that.
How romantic.
And they were walking together and he realized that they were just like at different points. Like Elle was just starting her career. So she was like modeling, you're going to be going all over the world. You're going to be going to do different things, different shoots. Like, and he's like, I didn't want to hold her back by being tied to this relationship. So he just like, as they were walking, he realized this has an expiration date. Like this isn't going to last because she's needs to focus on her career if she's going to like take it to a good place. So that's where he wrote the song So It Goes about that.
Really?
Because he realized like this is going to end. I'm going to try and enjoy it while it's here, but it's going to end. And then she left. She went to Europe for a shoot for like 6 months or something. And they kind of both saw that as like the end of the relationship. And while that happened, Christy Brinkley's fiance unfortunately passed away in a very bad race car accident.
Dude.
And so Billy just got back in touch with her like as a friend, like offering to like be there for her, help her out, support her, whatever. And then over the months, they started getting closer and they started going like little dates together until one time they were on like one of their first dates and he took her back to his apartment. And little did he know, Elle was back in town.
No.
And didn't know where to stay.
No.
So she came to his apartment.
Oh my
to
God.
sleep there, like to just stay there while she was in town. So Billy brings Christy back up to this apartment and Elle is there and he's like, oh boy, what do I do here? Apparently Christy was very understanding. Like they weren't exclusive at that point anyway, but like Elle they weren't.
I'm sure Elle didn't realize that he had started dating her friend.
Probably not. But Billy was like, all I kept thinking about was like, if I was Frank Sinatra, I could turn this into the greatest night of my life. But I'm not. So
and that's a good thing.
Ended up leaving with like, they both left.
She's like, maybe I'll stay with you instead, Christy.
But anyway, he cast Christy to star in the music video for Uptown Girl. And she came over to his apartment to teach him how to dance for the video, even though they both hated dancing. Billy was kind of obsessed with his image at this time, and he wanted to be seen with Christy to kind of show off at like a what he could get kind of thing.
I mean, yeah, I'd want to show her off too.
Yeah. But
Either of them.
But he also seemed madly in love with her and would vehemently defend her against the press who wanted to paint her as kind of like a dumb blonde or a vain supermodel all the time. They would eventually divorce in 1994 due to Billy's exhausting touring schedule and Christy wanting to live in LA. At least that's what I saw. I don't know the real reason. Billy was also one of the first artists to really utilize the video format, and he'd make clips and videos specifically for MTV, which helped him stay popular. Originally, he thought of greatest hits albums as marking the end of someone's career, but he agreed to do one and released it in 1985, featuring 2 new songs that both broke the top 40. His next album, in 1986, called The Bridge, did not do that well commercially. He has stated that he doesn't think that album is good. It was the last album that he did with the producer Ramone, In 1989, he was forced to fire and sue his manager, who was his former brother-in-law.
He really needs to stop giving these management positions to family members.
But discrepancies were found in his finances, so he fired and eventually had to sue him. He also shook up his band, bringing in new faces, and he worked with a new producer. The result was an album called Stormfront in 1989, which was his first #1 album in 9 years, and it featured the song We Didn't Start the Fire. That also hit #1, which was only his third song to do so.
That's really wild that We Didn't Start the Fire was one of the number ones.
It featured the song And So It Goes, which Billy has said since is his favorite song that he's ever written. In 1993, Billy released River of Dreams, which was his last album to date. Probably his last ever. I don't see him releasing another album. After this album, he entered legacy status and stopped writing songs. He said about that decision, quote, "People can say I'm coasting, but I stopped wanting to write songs. It took a toll on me. Your personal life goes to hell in a handcart because you're in a cave. All you're doing is thinking about songs in your own hell. I hate writing, but I love having written. I just stopped wanting to do it." End quote.
It's a good reason to stop.
That's fair. Billy started to tour with Elton John. They did a series of face-to-face dates that made them the highest-selling tandem touring musicians in history. In 2006, he began a tour across the U.S., having not released any new music for 13 years. He sold out Madison Square Garden 12 times over several months. So, Madison Square Garden retired the number 12, and it's the first number retired because of a non-athlete. He has continued to write a couple of songs in the past decades, but normally other artists will perform them, and a lot of them are more like orchestral, classical music type stuff, like not lyrics. In 2014, he announced a residency at Madison Square Garden, playing one concert a month for as long as he wants to do it. Throughout the years, Billy, like almost everyone we talk about, has struggled with substance abuse. His main struggle was alcohol. He's been to rehab twice, but he hasn't completely quit drinking. He said his drinking problems come sporadically when he is in the midst of a breakup or something. Not totally unexpected for someone with depression.
Yeah, I was like that. I think that's most of us.
He said that he used booze as a medication. He had a series of car accidents that preceded him going to rehab, but he says that none of them were alcohol related and that he's never had a DUI. In 2003, he got married again to a chef named Katie Lee. She was 23 and he was 55. Christy Brinkley was at the wedding and she gave her approval to their marriage. They separated in 2009, though. He got married again in 2015 to a former Morgan Stanley executive. They have 2 children together, and Billy mostly just hangs out at home these days in a mansion near where he grew up. He says he doesn't like to have a bunch of staff around because he wants to walk around in his boxers. He does have a daughter with Christy Brinkley named Alexa Ray, who is also a singer, and she has released a few singles and an EP through indie labels. In 2009, after the breakup of her 4-year relationship, she took a large quantity of Tramil, which has no active ingredient and is essentially impossible to overdose on. But she probably did not know that. She said it was not a suicide attempt. She was just trying to calm herself down during a panic attack. But she was, hospitalized for it. Billy did not visit her in the hospital, wanting to avoid a circus environment, but he stayed in constant phone contact. And that's Billy.